How's it going? In this video, probably the final video in the series, we will load and save files. There'll be quite a bit here, but I'll try to go through it step by step and show the results as we go. So one thing we'll need, we'll get this now, is file dialog in order to select files for loading and saving. We'll get to that later on. But something else that we're going to need is, as we add things to the map, we're adding them to a dictionary, but it will help if we keep track of where our smallest and largest X and Y values are. So think of the dictionaries that we're throwing the objects in as being pretty flexible. But when we save this to a file, we are going to need to write it into an array format. And for that reason, we need to be able to keep track of sort of the min and max bounds of our area, as well as the number of rows and columns that our freeform space is encompassing. Just for future reference, I'll just put a little comment here, the way this file format is going to work. The way it's going to work is we're going to have the first line, I'll just write file format. The first line is going to be size and then space, kind of like assembly language. We're going to separate this with spaces, so we'll have rows and columns. Then the next line will be geometry, and then we'll have some geometry data. This will be written in array format, so we'll have, like, you know, number 1, number 2, number 3, just like that, spaced out, okay, because everything's going to be separated with spaces. And then we'll have the floor data, and then we'll have ceiling data, and then things. And the only thing that we have in our level at the moment is a player. The way we store that is player space X space Y. Later on, if you want to go and edit this and do your own sort of version, or if I reuse this later on, I'll be putting in more things like lights, enemies, power-ups, all of that, and they'll have sort of a similar format to this. Okay, so where was I? As I add things, I want to control my position, like my minimum and my maximum. So I'm going to make a function for that. Fair enough. Here's how we'll do it. Okay, that's looking good, pretty straightforward. And then I'm just going to get the number of rows and columns. Just using the formula that the number of things on an interval is the largest minus the smallest plus 1. Also worth noting that in matrix form, typically rows will be going up and down, so the rows will actually be tracking the Y coordinate, and the columns will actually be tracking the X coordinate, because columns go left to right. So what we can do is, we've got that function there. We can call that function anytime we add something. Think of it like every time we add something, we are potentially casting the net a little wider around the space of our level. I'm not going to add functions to check for object removal, because those objects are being removed. The only sort of downside, the only sort of edge case, is if I make a bunch of objects which are really spaced out, then I remove them. The array which is exported could be a lot bigger than the actual map data, but that's not an issue that I'm really going to worry about. It's not that big of a deal. When we load it in on the other end, that unused data is sort of removed anyway. Sort of. All right, so where was I? Remove player. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back to these functions which I defined down here, new map and all of this. And I just realized I forgot this. I want to go self. I want to trigger a repaint event after each of these things happened. I noticed this before when I clicked new map and a new map didn't appear. It's because everything needed to be refreshed. Okay, so now I'm going to use, going to investigate these save and load functions. Okay, so what will I do? I'm going to grab, I want to open a file dialog to select a location to save to. So I'll say file name equals that file dialog. And this is a class here, but I can call a constructor here. I can say get save file name. And this will actually, I pass in widget, put it to self, that's fine, because it belongs to this class. So that's what it will sort of return to. And then I want to print that file name, check that it's all good. So I load this right now. Let's say I'm happy with this map. I go to save it. It says, where do you want to save it? Let's do test.txt, save. I'll close that down. And it says down here, it says, that stuff, save.test.txt, and then it's all file stuff. So really what I want to do is, I want to get the first thing there in the file name. So try that again. Just a lot of iterations. We go test.txt. Okay. And yep, it's printing that out. That is excellent. Another edge case here is what if we go and we go to save, then we say, wait a second, I don't want to save, I want to load or something. So we hit cancel. Let's see, there's this extra line here. So this actually returns, if I cancel, it returns an empty string. So what I want to do, so I want to say, if the length of that file name is bigger than 0, then do something with it. In other words, if we got a valid file name. So again, I go save, I go, no, I don't want to do that. And see, it has not printed out an extra line. That is good. That's working as we expect. Okay, and I'm actually going to do the same thing down here with load, except I'm going to get, what is it? Get open file name. That's fine. So if I pop in here and I say, okay, I want to load a map. Now it says open. And yeah, that'll work. Oh, let's try this. Okay, we'll go load, just as an example. And of course, this is crazy. It shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't load this, but we can pick a file. Okay, cool. So the next step is before I actually call these functions, I'm going to pop over to my map class. I'm going to make some functions here to save and load files. Okay, so I'm going to speed things up a little bit. What we're doing here is we want to make some functions to save parts of the, well, we'll treat this map pretty much as a database. So I want to save parts of that. So I'm just going to comment these out for now. Let's try to get the first one working. So we want to save size. And the way this works is, again, we write the string size, space, number of rows, number of columns. So here we go. This is about as straightforward as it goes. So here we save that, and we can test that. So we can go, okay, load that. Let me make a few random things. We'll go save, and I'll go with test.text. Of course, we need to actually call that. Yeah, all right. Try that again. Okay, we've saved that. I'll just load that up. And yep, it says size 3 by 2. So that's 3 rows, 1, 2, 3, 2 columns, 1, 2. Awesome. Now I want to get the geometry, the doors and walls. To do this, I'm going to write a sort of general function which takes any sort of dictionary and constructs an array and then writes that array to a file. Okay, so here's my function, quick typing. Okay, so we take in a file and we take in a source, which is any sort of dictionary. The first step is we need to construct an array. So we start with this list, and it's going to be lists within lists. So for instance, if this was like, you know, something, we would have, you know, this would be row 1, this would be row 2, but doesn't matter. Let's go in and write that. So we can loop through the number of rows, and for each row, we create a blank list. Then we'll just append a bunch of zeros on there. And then once we go through the full column, so if we've got 2 columns, we'll do this twice, append 2 zeros, then we'll stick that onto our data set, then we'll go on to the next row. So this stuff here is just constructing an array of all zeros based on the size of our map. Then what we do is we search through, this is a dictionary, so we do the key value loop from items. And I'm going to make this as general as possible. In general, the elements here should be integers, or at least strings which are integers, except if we have a D for door. So we have this check to see if we saw a D. Great. And if we don't see a D, then I want to actually add 1 onto the index. Remember, if I draw a wall with texture 0, then I'll see a 0 here. But then I have an issue of how do I differentiate between a 0 and empty space. So what I'll do is when I write this, I'll 1 index it. So I'll add 1 onto all the texture indices. And then when I load it, I'll understand that a 0 actually means empty space and a 1 actually represents texture index 0. So it's just a little trick that I'll do there. And then also with these entries, they're being stored in XY format, the positions, but I want to write them in row column format, which means I need to flip it around so the Y goes here for the row and the X goes here for the column. Okay. Anyway, then I'll go and so this is sort of filling in some entries for some of the walls which are there. And then I'll look through it and I'll take whatever's there. I'm just copy pasting the whole array onto the file line by line. I'm going to separate them with spaces. And then at the end of each line, I'm just going to write a new line. So let's test this. So what do I want to do? I want to go. Okay, so to save geometry, I'm going to write the line geometry, then I'm going to call that save array function and pass in my geometry dictionary. Let's just see how that works. So again, I'll construct as a wall, texture index 0, then a wall, texture index 1, texture index 2, and then a door. Okay, that's looking good. I'll go save that. Then I'll just open that up. Okay, so again, we're 3 by 2, that makes sense. And then we have, we're offsetting everything by 1. So these zeros are empty space, and these numbers are texture indices. We have the door there. Okay, that is looking great. So then we can, it's actually not too hard to extend this and implement all of our other save functions. So here we're saving floors and ceilings, and they work the same way. We're just calling that same save array function. So we can now call those. And the last thing I want to do is save the things. Okay, so again, the first line we'll write has things, and then we'll check if we have a player to save. And if we do, then we will write them. X space Y. Okay. So I'll just take a second and make a full level and see how it goes. Got the player there, so that looks pretty good. We'll just save that now. Overwrite the same file, why not? Now just bring this up and we'll compare. Okay, so for our geometry, we have the walls and the door. That's looking good. For the floors, they are floor index 0, which is set to index 1 in the file. And yeah. And then for the player, we have our player here. They are at x equals 1, y equals 2. Awesome. Cool. So we've got that saved. The next part here is trying to load this back in. By the way, just double checking, we go new. Yep, that's looking great. Okay. So I'll just set this up so we're ready to go. We go self map load. Awesome. And then we'll write the load functions. It's super important to make sure to reset all of our internal data before we load. Otherwise, the old maps, the old stuff will still be there. Anyway, we could also reset our bounds for xmin and xmax, but it's not super important. I mean, it wouldn't hurt. We probably should, but let's not. So now what we need to do is we need to, let's go with load size. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to take this one step at a time. The first thing we do is we read a line. And let me really take this one step at a time. That's fine. That'll work for now. Okay, we load that. And what it says is size 5.5. Okay. That makes sense. But see, there's also this new line thing here. Now let's make it more obvious. So let's say split the line and then print it out. So this will split based on spaces. And now it's really clear that there's this extra new line character in there because it's at the end of the line. Now it turns out we don't need this. So what we can do is we can say, okay, read the line and then replace anytime you see new line, replace it with the blank string. In other words, get rid of it. Okay, good. So we have size 5 and 5. Now we can ignore the tag. The tag's really just there for visual purposes. And if we get the number of rows and columns by converting thing 1 and 2 into integers. Now, again, if we're starting at, okay, we're always automatically going to center this at 0, 0. There's no reason to do it any other way. It also has the benefit that then when we load something, we don't have to go scrolling around to find where the actual map data is, which I have done in some of my editors in the past. Now, if we have 10 rows, then we want to go from y equals 0 to y equals 9, not to y equals 10. That's 11 rows. So that's why we subtract 1 from these dimensions here. Now, in order to do the other ones, we're going to need a general load array function. Here's how we're going to call it. We're going to do this. First of all, the next line that we see will say geometry, and we don't need to do anything with it. So if we call read line once, that will read it and progress the reader, and no issues. The next thing is we're going to call this function. We're going to pass in our geometry dictionary. We want to load data into that. So here's how that's going to work. We're going to, we know how many rows are in the map from reading the line, reading the size earlier, so we know how many lines will have the data. We'll go through the same process. So we'll get rid of that trailing new line, turn it into an array, splitting on spaces, and we probably don't need to do that. We probably don't need to print it. But then we, line will have all of the data, and it will be going along by x coordinates. So then we loop through the number of, based on the number of columns, and grab that data. If we get 0, then it's empty. We continue to the next step of the loop. If we don't get 0, then we pop down here. We will either have a door or a texture index. If we get a texture index, then we subtract 1. So again, this is correcting for the empty space compensation. So now, if I see a 1, that is texture index 0, and so on. Then we use the XY from this loop to construct a new key in our dictionary, and the value that we pass in there is just the number or the string that we read from that file. So this should be working okay. I'm going to load geometry. Let's go for it. Okay, so we'll go load, test, and there we have it. That's our walls and our door. Okay, cool. Now we'll just keep calling this function to load everything else. Okay, so very similar. We call read line once to get the tag and not use it, and then we load the actual data. Okay, I guess the only other thing we need to do is load the things. So I guess this is a little different because now we have a potentially, well, not indefinite, but we have a lot of things that we could load. Actually, yeah, it is potentially indefinite, I guess. Anyway, so the way we'll handle that is with a while loop. Okay, so we say line equals read line, and then we say while line. So when we reach the end of the file, line will be an empty string or some other sort of false-like object. So then we can go through this line, this stuff, and at the end of the loop, we, read another line. So this is making sure that we're progressing to the next line. And again, when we reach the end of the file, this loop will break. So we go through the usual stuff. We get rid of the new line, we split it up, and then we check, okay, is the tag player? So now we actually are going to use the tag. And if we have the tag of player, then we can set the X and Y positions and save that in the player variable. Anyway, so long story short, we can load this now, and we can select our level, and it loads up just the same as before. So we have our floors, our ceilings, and these are the same textures that we had stored earlier. Anyway, we can now use this level tool to make some pretty cool levels and save them and load them. And then later on, if we make a game engine, we can load the levels which were created with this editor, and it speeds things up quite a lot. This is about as in-depth as I'm going to go into this topic at the moment. Maybe later on in my projects I'll expand this editor a little bit, but really not that much. I'll just be adding monsters and lights and stuff to the editor. It'll pretty much be the same as Player. It'll be something where you just click somewhere and it makes one. With the lights, you'll have some properties to edit. Anyway, I'll get to that when I do. I hope you had fun. And yeah, I'll see you again soon. Bye.